better? Yeah. Good morning. I'm going to present these two together. It's a full and an LBC application, but they're kind of interlinked. So I shall begin. This site within the red line is 1.78 hectares in area. It's southwest of Newmarket Road, which is this road here, and on the south side of Newmarket Road, which is this road along here. Sorry, it's not moving.
It's frozen, has it?
Ah.
Let's jump too quick, is it?
No, that's okay. So the existing buildings on the site, part of the historic Newmarkets complex, built between 1905 and 1918. It includes the B-listed Corn Exchange building and other listed buildings which are out with the application site. So this is the main range. It's B-listed. Former livestock sheds or cattle sheds built in 1912 by James A. Williamson, who was the Superintendent of Works. So these are 5-aisled, steel-framed, corrugated iron structures with, cast iron structures with a corrugated asbestos and glazed roof. I should say that the frames are actually in steel. They are currently in use as a five-a-side football pitches. That's the interior. This is the associated range of buildings on the southeast edge of the site. It was the former milk cow buyers and the sales ring. The sales ring is what's the smaller building in the centre there, that has the glazed roof. These buildings are currently in use as a £10 bowling alley and a snooker hall, and that is the bar. This big structure on the edge of the site on the Asda Road is a standalone modern shed. You'll also see there's some modern additions to the original range. These are the buildings out with the application site, but they're the main buildings of the former Newmarkets. The Corn Exchange, which is B-listed, it was restored in 1999 for use as a concert and entertainments venue, which has now become the O2. This is the former Market Refreshment Rooms, C-listed. It's a bar and bistro. And finally, sorry, back to that one, the building at the end, the taller building is used to be the St Cuthbert's Association Cattle Depot, B-listed as well. And finally, on Newmarket Road, this is the former John Swan and Sons Livestock Market, and the buildings to the on the left-hand side of the photograph going down Newmarket Road it's a modern extension of office buildings. Just looking at the surrounding area, it's mixed use and character. That's Asda supermarket, as you know. And it's got a very large car park. We've got the Nuffield Health Gym, which has also got a large car park. That's the office range on the other side of Newmarket Road. And the commercial uses continue. There's a vet at the corner there. These are flats, residential flats. On Hutchison Terrace, again, more houses, more flats. And this is just a context photo of some of the surrounding buildings, including the row of shops on Hutchison Terrace. And this is also a local centre. So just looking at the site, it's level within. And you can see a marked drop between this Asda Road and that's the milk cow buyers and sales ring building block. And this is the modern shed. This is the main access into the site from Newmarket Road. And off Newmarket Road is the gated access, which is the vehicular access into the servicing and deliveries area for the O2 Academy, which is into the left. So the proposal is to take down the majority of the former cattle sheds, retaining this blue rectangle here is approximately 12%. So it's keeping the 4 central bays of the frames and parts of the roof structure, moving it forward by 1 bay depth, and re-erecting the 4 central bays and the frames. Also keeping 6 columns as freestanding elements in the landscape, including the girder trusses to link these 2 rear columns, and demolishing roughly 2/3 of the milch cow buyers and sales ring range, keeping these 3 bays, including the former auction ring building. This is the site master plan with the mixed-use development of 393 build-to-rent apartments. That's on blocks 1, 2A and 2B, including 100 in an affordable block. And then a student accommodation block with 406 bed spaces. There's in this retained building, I'll just go back to that, there's going to be ancillary residence, leisure and amenity spaces and community uses, including a cafe restaurant, co-working area and a wellness yoga studio. This area here is a new public square in front of the retained sheds and the auction ring buildings. A new street frontages to Newmark Road, which is here, and Asda Road. A central path running between Newmark Road and Asda Road. Tree-lined main thoroughfare with a shared surface. And the whole development is car parking free, except for 2 accessible spaces in the central avenue and 3 car club spaces on Newmark Road. And there'll be a storytelling wall of the site history within the communal garden beside the public square, which is this area. Sorry, cursor is not working. So this is showing you how the buildings will be arranged. There's 3 main blocks. Blocks 1 and 2 and the affordable block, which are these buildings here. There's 7 stories with setback top stories and parts. They step down at the northwest edge towards Newmark Road. And then there's 2 entrance pavilions under the retained sheds. This here's the student accommodation block onto Asda Road. It's 8 stories, although only 5.5 will be visible above Asda Road due to the change in level. And the main entrance is at the southeast end. And this one here is the Newmark Road elevation of the build-to-rent block. In terms of architectural style, it's a blend of historic industrial-inspired forms with contemporary detailing, a mix of traditional and modern materials. So we've got multi-tone red and buff brick and grey, buff and white fibre cement. We've got grey standing seam cladding on the roofs, and the windows and the exterior doors and the balustrades will be in metal. The plant will mainly be at lower level, ground and roof level throughout the buildings. It's giving you a taste of the landscaping, proposed landscaping, significant areas of soft and hard landscaping forming the new public square and the main thoroughfare and the connecting paths in the private gardens. There are no trees within this site. The planting, they'll have some semi-mature trees, including rowan and pear, along the central avenue, within the public square and on the Asda edge of the site, and smaller ornamental trees in the private gardens. We have small private gardens for the build-to-rent and the student units at ground level, and some communal garden spaces for the build-to-rent residents, and also off the central avenue and at the east end of the student block. This is showing you the, there'll be rain gardens throughout. This is showing you the green roofs, which will be throughout the site. They'll have a lot of other planted features like shrubs, hedging, grasses and bulbs, hard standing in a mix of non-permeable and permeable pavers, tactile paving on hazardous areas, timber-topped metal benches and cube seats. This is going on to the access and servicing. So this is the central avenue I'm trying to get connecting from Newmark Road. It's an accessible pedestrian and active travel route from Newmark Road to Asda Road. There it is, connecting with the existing active travel links around the site, including the Water of Leith path. That's one of the paths that comes out towards the Water of Leith walkway. So back to this one. Yeah, this is a shared surface. This one's showing you the change in level between Asda Road and the site. So there'll be one step of stairs, flight of stairs. I'll go back to this one. This is stair access here, this route here, sorry. And then the other access here will be stairs, but there'll also be an accessible lift. In terms of cycle parking, I'll give you the details of the cycle parking later, but there's over 1,200 secure spaces at ground level, and they're throughout each BTR block and at the lower ground floor level at the student block. All stores will be accessed via lockable security system. There's a large communal store on the ground floor of the retained former auction ring building, with additional space for a range of bike types and the potential for a workshop stroke maintenance facilities. And there are going to be 88 Sheffield cycle stands within the landscape. So these are the key considerations of this application: the impact on the listed buildings, the principle of use, the design and amenity, noise, and the car parking free development. So first of all, looking at the listed buildings, this is a scale of significance that they've identified each part. This is being assessed against Section 59 of the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Scotland Act 1997, along with the relevant Historic Environment Scotland guidance. Historic Environment Scotland are only a statutory consultee on the listed building consent application, as this development affects only B and C listed buildings. However, I've mentioned their comments throughout both because it's all relevant. The proposal itself, it falls between the two Historic Environment Scotland Manage and Change publications. One is use and adaptation of listed buildings, and the other is demolition. The relevant section in the use and adaptation policy is selective demolition. It's the most applicable part, which involves the removal or demolition of parts of a listed building to enable significant parts to be retained. The extent of removal in this case is substantial, but the parts of the structures to be demolished are the less significant elements and later alterations. So the overall approach has been to retain the representative characteristic parts of the former cattle sheds, along with the most significant section of the curtilage buildings, which is the auction ring and the 2 flanking bays. So again, just to focus on a scale of significance, it's showing you this central area of the livestock sheds. It's the main item of listing on the site. The others are curtilage buildings, but nevertheless they have got some significance. Then it shows you the scale, like a sliding scale of these later additions in terms of significance. This is showing you the cattle sheds as they are at the moment and some of the unsympathetic additions. These concrete walls at the base, these entrances, the netting up, this is all to do with the world of football. This is a changing room block, which is functional onto Newmark Road. That's the interior of it. And this is us in the one of the main bays. You can see that it's been altered structurally. They've taken out some of the columns. And this is a roof structure, the authenticity of which has been affected by functional localised repairs. Yeah, and the original interior of the former Milch Byres has been lost. And they've got suspended ceilings throughout. So we then move to the tests. This is because it's extensive demolition, I've assessed it against the HES demolition tests. So test 1 is about, is the building no longer of special interest? The answer is no. The former cattle shed range it's of intrinsic historic and architectural interest. Because it's a fine example of this type of building and its construction. The other range, the curtilage range, although it's listed as curtilage buildings, are nevertheless part of the historic range, so they are of some significance too. The next test 2 is about, is the building incapable of meaningful repair? Now this is separate to the assessment of the economic viability. So these are traditionally constructed buildings, and any traditionally constructed building, even if it's an advanced state of decay, it can be repaired. The exception would be if there was a significant loss of original fabric, such as fire damage. So the answer is it can be, technically. The third test is the demolition of the building essential to delivering significant benefits to economic growth of the wider community? The answer is no. Although the development will deliver benefits to the wider community in terms of housing and associated economic growth in the area, it's not of public significance to the extent that it would justify demolition in itself. The fourth test is about economic viability. So the economic viability of retaining all the parts of listed assets has been assessed by the applicant through a series of detailed speculative development appraisals based on condition surveys of the existing buildings and cost estimates, along with a marketing exercise. So looking at the condition of the building, you'll see that there's quite a lot of corrosion in the steel in many areas of the frames. The roof coverings and the roof-like structures of the football complex are in very poor condition. There's a lot of netting up, at roof height to save falling debris. They're becoming hazardous. The curtilage range is in fair condition overall, but there's numerous cracks in the rendered walls. And there's areas of bossing. The roof structure and the critical windows are failing in areas. So a substantial conservation deficit has been identified across the site. So the redevelopment of the site with full retention of the listed buildings through minimum intervention, adaptation, extension is not economically viable. The current uses are no longer sustainable because they would need to modernise the facilities to meet and compete with modern requirements. There's high ongoing costs of repair and maintenance. The the cost of repair and or replacement of the roofs and the glazed structures of the former cattle sheds and byres is unsustainable, and some sections are hazardous. And the existing situation was compounded by a long period of shutdown during the pandemic. The applicant has explored which alternative uses would enable viable retention of the most important representative elements, including alternative uses, along with varying degrees of selective demolition and new build. So, Historic Environment Scotland accepts this situation. They would have preferred slightly further retention of the listed buildings, but this would not have been economically viable. Our economic development has studied the applicant's calculations and found these to be generally acceptable with a reasonable, if below normal, profit margin. So this is the proposal showing you the retained parts of the listed cattle sheds. This is these two central bays with part of their roof structure kept and restored. The frames will be dismantled to ascertain which segments are in the best condition and which original existing cladding materials can be retained. These will become central features of the proposed this is the new Heritage Square, and this is leading to the lobbies of the new BTR flats. And the space below these will form part of the new public realm space. The reason for not completing the roof structure was because you need to allow sufficient light into the new flats. So this is representative parts. Just back to this one, this is looking at the retained cow byres and sales ring range to be restored externally using the original and matching materials, and this will be the proposed communal uses, which will acknowledge the historic nature of the auction ring as an area where people gathered. This one is showing you the retained columns with the trusses between them. So that will show you the extent of the original range. I've put conditions on to ensure that all the historic structures are officially recorded, and there's a robust methodology statement to be approved before any demolitions or temporary removals occur. So in summary, the level of demolition in this case is justified because of the current condition of the main B-listed structures and prohibitive repair costs, and the viability of the existing use without essential repairs being carried out. So the only realistic way to save any key parts is through this radical intervention. In terms of setting, the frontage buildings, that's the Corn Exchange here, there's virtually no backdrop at the moment as viewed from Hutchison Terrace. The proposed buildings will introduce a backdrop to this scene, but the scale massing and the design will maintain an appropriate setting. It will be a complementary backdrop through the fragmentation and variation of the roofscape and the choice of materials in terms of type and tone. This is from the Asda Road. It will have far less impact. You just see that's the affordable block and the student block beyond. Just going back to this slide, to the Heritage Square. So within the site, the proposed Heritage Square will maintain the openness and the public nature of the hard-standing character of the historic yard. And there's an appropriate level of soft landscaping to provide visual and physical amenity. In terms of use, I'm just going down here. Yes, within the local centre and urban area of the local development plan, but the existing uses in this particular site are atypical. It's a suitable site for housing, and the proposals will contribute to the mix of uses in the local area. It's got good public transport and active travel links, and local education and health facilities and green spaces within the vicinity. It complies with policy How 8 on student accommodation, as it's on a regular bus route to the city centre and to the university or college campuses in the west side of the site. The scope for active travel to some of the campuses, for example, the Napier Craig Lockhart campus, it's approximately 16 minutes on foot or 5 minutes by bike. In terms of student concentration in the area, the latest available data is from the 2011 census, which shows a low concentration of students in the Fountain Bridge and Craig Lockhart ward, between 11.73% and 16.31%, including 2,603 approved student beds since the census. The percentage increases to between 22.65% and 20.87%. The proposed development would result in a further increase of about 1.5 to 1.69%, but the resulting concentration would not be excessive and it would be diluted by the proposed 393 BTR apartments. There are no local plan policies to prevent the loss of the existing leisure uses in the site, but the loss of the unique indoor five-a-side football facility has been acknowledged. Unfortunately, the nearest one is on Marine Drive, quite a way away. You will have seen, though, the statement submitted by Watkins Jones, where they explain that they're looking for a site within the area, to provide a much more modern facility like the Marine Drive one. There are various sporting activities available in the local area, albeit not exactly the same. We've got Megatland, Craig Lockhart and Saughton Sports Centre and Saughton Public Park. These are approximately a 10 to 15 minute walk away. They'll provide some mitigation. Sport Scotland didn't raise any objection because it considers the issue with its remit. So there's a need to balance the loss of these existing leisure uses against the significant benefits of using a brownfield site for housing of a significant scale. In terms of the local centre, the proposed non-retail development in the area is unlikely to have a detrimental impact on the centre's function. There'll be increased footfall within this car parking free development, which should have a positive economic impact on the surrounding area. And the promotion of the site's historic interests could attract other people to visit the area. In terms of sustainability, the redevelopment of key elements of the listed buildings into an appropriate and sustainable use is a sustainable approach. The regeneration of a brownfield site in appropriate housing use, and it promotes sustainable travel, mobility and accessibility. The principles of sustainable design and construction have been incorporated into the design strategy. It includes passive measures to reduce energy demand. It's got photovoltaic panels, air source heat pumps and low energy lighting. There's no fossil fuels. It's also got green roofs and there'll be rainwater harvesting and communal recycling facilities. And the proposed planting is to suit the localised site conditions and it will provide shelter, attenuate rainwater and encourage biodiversity. In terms of density, the density is higher in comparison to the typical flatted developments within the area. However, the higher density will make efficient use of a brownfield site, which is relatively close to the city centre and with accessibility to bus, rail and active transport. The number of units are linked to the viability of the scheme, given the heritage issues involved, along with the requirement for an on-site housing provision, so the density is acceptable in this particular context. In terms of design and sense of place, it will create a new distinguishable place inspired by the industrial heritage of the site. That's just showing you a seating area below the retained columns and trusses. So it'll be a physical and narrative form of the site and also embodied in the storytelling wall, along with the physical retention. This is just showing you the back of the Corn Exchange, just showing you the architecture, and this is showing you the proposed architecture. In terms of the forms and detailing materials of the new buildings, and the landscaping will reflect the historic architecture and the industrial character of the site and the surrounding area. The roofscape it includes the typical repetitive forms, rhythmic forms. The materials palettes appropriate in this mixed construction context and draws on the historic fabric. The scale is larger than the original massing, but the overall composition is sympathetic to the industrial character of the site, and there'll be attractive new street frontages created to Newmarket and Asda Road. I've applied a condition to ensure that the material specifications are acceptable in terms of the finer detailing and the precise finished tone, and also sustainable source. The landscaping, the greenery will enhance and demarcate various spaces throughout the development and add visual interest and colour to the site. And the avenue of trees will signpost the new active travel route. In terms of accessibility in the public realm, the car parking free development will provide new active travel routes throughout the site and improve permeability and connections from Newmarket Road to the Asda store and the business and services within the area and the Water of Leith Walkway beyond. Creation of a central square and thoroughfares will open the site to the public. In terms of the housing mix and size, there's an appropriate mix of housing types in the build-to-rent blocks, from studios to 3-bedroom family units. The requirement of a 20% provision of larger units has been met. Several larger units have direct access to private gardens, and all have access to the communal gardens. There'll be shared car parking free spaces, generally safe areas for children to play. The number of smaller units reflect the current market demand for BTR housing, which is relatively young people and professionals. The minimum internal floor areas specified in the Edinburgh Design Guidance has been met. Any deviation is minor and affects the open plan flats only. This is just showing you the mix. In the student guidance, this is the student block. There's a mix of studio and cluster rooms, which meets the criterion D of the student housing guidance. In terms of the design, the conclusion is that it's based on a strong sustainable concept which draws on the positive characteristics of the site and the surrounding area and will create a new sense of place. A fine balance has been reached in terms of new build development, which allows meaningful retention of the key elements of the listed buildings without compromising planning policy and guidance to an unacceptable extent. In terms of the affordable housing, there'll be an on-site provision of 100 units, which meets the 25% policy requirement. The applicant is engaged with potential affordable housing providers and is committed to meet the council's aspiration for a 70% social rent. There is a letter from Link Housing received after the affordable housing consultation was received, which explains this. Be a 10-year blind affordable block, well integrated into the wider development, and it will occupy prominent areas of the site. So the provision of these units will be secured by a Section 75 legal agreement, including the final 10-year mix. In terms of the residential amenity, this is about usable green space. The 20% target overall will be met. That's under the definition of green usable space as areas where there is no mass planting, which would prevent usable access. The proposed BTR units, excluding 39 units with private external spaces, would have an average of 7.2 square metres per unit of usable external green space, which does fall short of the Policy House 3 requirement of 10 metres. The shortfall in these normal standards is mitigated to an extent with the communal open space provided within the new public square, which includes appropriate green landscaping, which will create attractive amenity space with sheltered areas. the private gardens meet the minimum 3 metre depth requirement of the Edinburgh Design Guidance. In terms of the open space strategy, the nearest space of at least good play area at Saughton Park. It's just within 800 metres of the site, around a 10 to 15 minute walk away. And there are other smaller green spaces, for example, Redhall Park with play equipment within this range. And then we've got Craiglurk Hills, East and West, and Dovecote Park within a mile and foot. And these are realistic walking distances. They're not just a straight line in a map. I have checked them. So the overall level of external amenity will be appropriate given the heritage constraints of this site. There's a couple of external communal terraces in the BTR block, and some units in the affordable houses have small balconies. In terms of the internal amenity space, the build-to-rent housing will have a good range of dedicated internal amenity spaces, including lounges, exercise facilities, working from home and study spaces. There's an appropriate level of internal amenity space for the student accommodation, a range of communal spaces with direct access to private external terraces. In terms of dual aspect, the Edinburgh Design Guidance minimum requirement is 50% of the total number of flats. The BTR development achieves only 33%, but the guidance does allow a flexible approach for BTR housing where open plan layouts are proposed, and that's 75% of flats in this development. The proposed ratio of dual to single aspect is due to the significant site constraints and relatively high build costs. All flats will have full-length windows with small Juliet balconies, and the upper floor flats will have great views, which is a mitigation to some extent. In terms of daylighting and sunlighting, the levels will meet the requirement as set out in the Edinburgh Design Guidance within this particular urban context and given the constraints of the site. Level of sunlighting, the minimum standard for sunlight hours will not be met within all open spaces, although the level of failure is marginal at 4%. The proximity of the buildings is driven by the creation of the public space needed to preserve the setting of the retained listed structures, so a degree of overshadowing is inevitable. The level of sunlight is acceptable given the proximity to the water of Leith and public parks. There are no concerns regarding privacy or overlooking. In terms of noise, this is the back of the O2 Academy, within the former Corn Exchange building. Key concern is the noise levels from the Academy affecting future occupiers of the development. Environmental protection is particularly concerned that if justified noise complaints are received from residents regarding the O2 Academy, then action could be taken against the business, including noise from plant. That's just showing you where the BTR blocks are in relation to the rear of the O2. So the agent of change principle in section 41A of the 1997 Act requires planning authorities to take into account whether a development near a noise generating use includes sufficient measures to mitigate, minimise or manage the effect of noise, and may not impose additional conditions relating to acoustic design measures on the noise source. The O2 venues operating under a 1998 planning permission, conditions were attached to ensure that noise levels emitting from the venue from events and plant, machinery or equipment were acceptable in terms of the impact on nearby residences, and the scheme included a soundproofing box around the main noise generating part of the building. The specific wording of the conditions was the soundproofing of the premises and the control of all amplified sound, including music, speech, electronic video games or other amusement machines, being such that no amplified sound is audible in nearby residential or commercial property. So the scheme of soundproofing required to be submitted and approved by the planning authority, which it was. The noise impact assessment that's been submitted with this application concludes that secondary glazing will be required to control amplified music noise ingress into the affected residences facing the venue, and in some flats not directly facing. Ventilation of these flats will need to be mechanical to avoid reliance on opening windows. Now, environmental protection standards requires acceptable noise levels. Environmental protection standards requires acceptable noise levels, allowing for windows to be open. Is this unachievable in this site? And environmental protection only accepts closed windows for transport noise. It's acknowledged that the development will expose more residents to noise from the O2 Academy, but the required retention of key elements of listed buildings on the site significantly limit the opportunities for positioning residential blocks within an economically viable scheme that also maintains a satisfactory level of amenity. There are indeed existing residential flats across the road behind the commercial block on Newmark Road, in proximity to the O2 Academy. Adequate mitigation measures can be put in place to attenuate the noise to an acceptable level within the nearest living apartments, albeit using a closed window standard. Noise from the venue is not constant, and the acoustic assessment is based on the worst case noise levels as observed over 2 concerts attended. Notably, all venue doors were open on 1 occasion. So a range of conditions have been applied to mitigate any negative impacts on the amenity of future occupiers, including from customers, plant and servicing activities. And they reference the standards specified in the noise impact assessment. The scheme also includes a 2-metre high imperforate acoustic barrier around the external amenity area, adjacent to the road and Newmark Road. Adjacent to the external loading bay, and appropriate glazing standards for properties closest to the traffic noise on Asda Road and Newmark Road. At this point, I'll raise the late representation that's been received. It was a development of the previous objection noted in the report, which was the proposed build-to-rent residential flats in close proximity to the O2 Academy and the mitigation measures proposed in the noise impact assessment submitted are entirely insufficient in terms of ensuring that the proposed noise-sensitive development is equipped with sufficient measures to mitigate, minimise or manage the effect of noise from the entertainment venue. So it goes on to say that section 41A makes it clear that if the council was to decide to grant planning permission, it could not, as a condition of granting planning permission, impose additional costs relating to acoustic measures to mitigate the effects of the noise. So additional conditions have been suggested. The conclusion here is that the level of residential amenity that can be provided on this site, as required by policies How 3 and the Edinburgh Design Guidance, will not be fully achieved, but there are mitigating circumstances due primarily to heritage constraints. The level of non-compliance with normal standards will not have a significant detrimental impact on overall amenity levels for future residents. In terms of the car parking free development, this is a sustainable location for this type of development, and it's in proximity to a range of sustainable and active means of travel. They've gone for a detailed transport statement rather than assessment on the basis of a likely low level of car ownership due to the types of accommodation proposed and the typical demographic of the occupants. The site is not within an existing or proposed controlled parking zone, so parking overspill into neighbouring streets is possible. However, the applicant has provided data relating to car parking provision and uptake at other BTR sites, with zero and very low parking provision, which demonstrates that car parking uptake is generally low in these type of developments. The emerging city plan seeks to reduce car travel in numbers and places emphasis on the delivery of 20-minute neighbourhoods, so approving car parking free developments consisting with council aims. I've added an informative recommending that the applicant develops a travel plan as a further way of promoting journeys by public transport and active travel means. The scheme also proposes 3 car club spaces to reduce the need for private car ownership. But in accessibility, the site will be accessible throughout. There's various level routes through. There's the accessible platform lift where there's a change in level between the site and the Asda Road. There are 2 level access points to the Water of Leith walkway beyond the site leading from Newmark Road. The specified path surfaces within the site will allow access for people using wheelchairs and pushchairs. And lift access will be provided through all the residential blocks. And there is a level of ramped access to the associated commercial uses and communal facilities. And there'll be 2 accessible car parking spaces off the shared street. This slide is cycle parking. It's in line with the guidance set out in the Edinburgh Design Guidance, 100% secure cycle parking for the build-to-rent student accommodation. Exceeds the required number of visitor spaces, all's at ground level, except for the stores in the student flats, that's here, which is at a lower ground level, but these will be accessible via a cycle-friendly lift and a ramp. The stands are mostly 2-tier, which doesn't comply with the cycle parking fact sheet requiring 50% single tier, but 54% of the total parking provision will be at ground level. It's an acceptable compromise to accommodate 100% cycle parking on this constrained site, along with a viable level of living space. There will be parking spaces for a range of non-standard bikes within a dedicated store, with potential for workshop maintenance facilities. Conditions have been applied to ensure that the proposed specifications are in accordance with the design standards set out in the Edinburgh Design Guidance and the fact sheet, and the access into the site caters for cyclists of varying needs. In terms of road safety, a condition has been applied to secure pedestrian priority signage and a 5-mile-an-hour speed limit on the shared surface, and a new crossing point on Asda Road connecting to the new steps and accessible platform lift. That's to be secured through a Section 75 agreement with the developer providing. Another Section 75 agreement will include the car club and education contributions. So the overall conclusion is that the proposal is acceptable with regard to Section 59 of the Planning Listed Building and Conservation Area Scotland Act, in terms of preserving the parts and features of the listed building that embody the special architectural and historic interest which the buildings possess. Overall, the development is in accordance with the development plan and will deliver a sustainable and well-designed urban residential scheme that draws on the industrial heritage of the site and will support the adjacent mixed uses surrounding the site. Any deviations from council policy or guidance are relatively minor and balanced by the wider benefits of the development in terms of the provision of housing with an appropriate affordable element on a redundant brownfield site, along with reduced reliance on car usage. This is an exceptional situation where opportunities for development in this site are severely restricted by the need to preserve the representative parts of important listed buildings. Alternative uses are limited by the nature of the buildings. The proposal also complies with the policy principles of sustainable development as set out in Scottish planning policy. Other material considerations support the presumption to grant planning permission. Now, if minded to grant there's a direction has been submitted by the Scottish Government requiring the Council to notify Scottish ministers of the above planning application and the listed building consent application. The direction is given to allow ministers to further consider the application of the agent of change principle, which may raise issues of national significance.
And I would just like to say on that point, apologies that it's not in your papers committee, but we only received the direction at yesterday lunchtime. So it's not covered in the papers because we only received the direction from the government at yesterday lunchtime. So that means that if committee are minded to grant the application, then there is a referral for 28 days to the ministers, and they will make the decision as to whether they call the application in for consideration. But we can take questions on that if anybody has it.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms McDonald. That was quite a marathon, and thank you very much indeed. Have a large glass of water. So we will start committee with questions. I see Councillor Meakin has a question. Then we'll go Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Beale, Councillor Jones. Please remember the... Oh, and Councillor Booth. So, Councillor McBean, one question at a time, please, everybody.
One question at a time. Okay, I've got a few, so I'll just listen one time. The first one is...
Just one question, we'll come back.
Okay. Industrial heritage is important. What's the complete total percentage of loss of B and C listed structures there?
It's roughly, a total roughly 50%.
Right, okay. I'll put my hand down and then back up again for each question.
I will circle back to you. I can't remember who I said. I said Councillor O'Neill, yes. Please, people, remember that order because my brain is not functioning particularly well today.
So, thank you, Convener. I have 1.5 questions and they're the same thing. Who's going to be responsible for the maintenance of the lifts, and why wasn't a ramp suitable in this instance? Thank you.
That's better. Yes. Two things. The owners of the site is the answer, and the other answer is because of the heritage constraints of the site, you would need a big area for a ramp, and it would eat into the remaining parts of the buildings.
I think when you look at the site layout that Claire explained, and there's the two different accesses, one point where there's just stairs going down is between two listed buildings, so there wasn't the land space to allow a ramp to go in. And then when you actually, I think committee were on site that day, when you see the level drops from the Asda Road down into the site, it's significant, and the land take that would be required would result in more demolition of listed buildings, and I think you would lose quite a percentage of your site to get a ramp in. You would end up with quite a long ramp going in there to get down to the levels.
Can I ask, I think it would be helpful to actually show, because I know some members managed to go on the site visit, others didn't. It'd be helpful to show the site, to actually show, as Councillor O'Neill says, if that is, how would individuals be able to get round and out of the site to, say, for example, Asda, or out of it if they couldn't use, or if the accessible lift wasn't functioning?
I think it's... Wait till I find a different slide. Have you got a wider?
Yes, that one's quite good.
No.
You need to go a little bit further.
Your circle, the local area.
Right.
This is quite a good slide in terms of the relationship of the site to the neighbouring uses and how you would move through and across the site. So central area in red is your application site. We're struggling to get the cursor up to point to it. The area to the north, that sort of blue, so along here you've got some commercial units, etc., offices and things that run here, and the main access in would be to this point here. There's an accessible route that comes north to south across the site. If you were within this site and you were looking to go that north-south, you're really only looking to come to Asda that way. There's limited options pulling you to the south. if the question was, if the lift wasn't working, how would you come out? There's an at-grade access that comes all the way out here that then opens up to the bus routes, to the employment, to the smaller shops here, and there's quite a large retail area within this area here. I don't know if you've visited there. There's like a Marks and Spencers and Home Bargains and various other uses there. If you were then continuing out up to the station, etc., you would come out here. The route to the Water of Leith into the access comes out this way at grade as well, and that comes out to this point here. And we're also in discussions with another development site at the other side of the Water of Leith for putting the accessible bridge into that location as well, that would then connect to the other side of the Water of Leith as well. So there's quite a lot of connections, and there is a tension at that point between that road, and it's really down to the levels and the historic nature. So there's quite a range of options for movement around the site, and there's probably just one pinch point where there is that change in level.
Is it a follow-up, Councillor O'Neill?
Yes, yes it is. So I live the other side of Waterleith, and I know it's completely impossible to get through in a wheelchair because of the drop curb situation. I appreciate that's not a planning matter, but I worry that you put a lift in, that's not going to solve all the problems. And I know these types of lifts that you put in, rain is going to happen. It's going to short circuit. The majority of lifts that are put in like this are broke within a month or two. So really, I'm kind of upset that it's not gonna help what it is, but I appreciate the historical constraints in the listed building, things like that. So is there something that we could say to the developers that, not familiar with how this works, maybe Councillor Booth
I think
is
what
better
we'll do is we'll look at informatives and possibly conditions as we go through. So if you we'll park that one for the moment.
Please. Yes.
No pun intended, to then have a consideration towards whether improvements need to be made on something like that. But very good point.
Thank you.
I think I was going Councillor Beale was next, I think. Or was it Councillor Jones? One of you two.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I've got quite a lot of concerns and quite a lot of questions about this site as well. So my first question is about flooding. It's one line in the application talks about flooding, and yet, and you can see from the picture in front of us at the moment, it's about 100 metres or 50 metres away from the Water of Leith. So could you explain why self-certification is okay in that situation as opposed to a SEPA? Thanks.
Yep. In terms of consultation, it falls short of the SEPA requirement to consult with them, so it was over to our council's flood planning team. Now, if there were any concerns raised by the flood planning team, it would have gone to SEPA. The flood planning team was content from the records and future predictions that that the mitigation measures that they're proposing on this site would be acceptable. So they did ask for some more information, but they were satisfied that it would be a non-risk.
Is it a follow-up, Councillor?
You just put none of that's actually mentioned here, which is why I'm raising it. So you're saying that the council team has looked at this?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Convener. My question relates to the sound, the noise impact from the OT Academy. And I think I heard you rightly when you said that no amplified sounds would actually be heard in the neighbouring residences because of the double glazing that's going to be put in. Can I just check, how can you be sure of that? And also, is that every property is getting the double glazing in that development? Thank you.
To answer that, the noise impact assessment that's been submitted specifies exactly which type of glazing and which exact units. There will be a standard across the site, but it identifies which properties will be the most receptive, and the conditions that I've put on are tied to the specifications that's set out in the noise impact assessment.
Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Convener. My question is about affordable housing. Could you go into a wee bit more detail about how the affordable housing will be provided? So specifically, is it intermediate rent? And has there been any change to the consultation response from affordable housing on the 3rd of October, where they said that they could not support the application as it currently stands?
Can I just say that Alex is on the call and we should bring him in at this stage? Thank you.
Good morning, committee, and thanks for your question, Councillor Booth. So the applicant, when they'd initially put their application in, had been requesting something which seemed to be at odds with what they were proposing. So it did look like they were suggesting that the scheme could be intermediate rent. However, after a period of consultation with them, they have then committed to the affordable housing coming forward through an affordable housing provider, through Link. Link have provided a letter of support, and we do have conditions set out for this application that we'd be looking for at least 70% social rent. So hopefully that answers your question.
Follow up?
Thanks, Camina. Follow up, just to confirm then, the letter that you submitted on the 3rd of October where you said that you couldn't support this application, you're withdrawing that, are you?
That's correct, yeah.
Now, circling back, Councillor Spinikin, would you like to go kick off round 2?
Yeah, round 2. Actually, Councillor O'Neill asked one of my questions, which was about that lift. You know, will it have access for mobility wheelchairs for bikes with toddler toes, and who's going to maintain it? I'm just going to say, living in a building where the lift has been out for a week, even though that's an indoor lift, it's paid for and there's a contract repair service. I know how long it takes to repair these things when they're outdoors. So anyway, my new question, all of that public realm, everything we're seeing pavement, which we're told will make things wheelchair accessible. Is it all permeable, rain permeable paving?
Percentages, along with there are rain gardens as well and areas of landscaping, so it's actually introducing far more greenery to the site, which is completely impermeable at the moment, and this is something that flood planning took into account.
Right, so the paving isn't rain permeable, but it's hoped that the rain's going to drain off into these rain gardens.
No, there's quite an element of permeable and non-permeable. There's various areas of it.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Beale. Sorry, Councillor Beale, sorry. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Convener. There's reference in the report to the applications being referred to the Urban Design Panel. I would just like to know on what basis, applications are referred to the Urban Design Panel. What are the criteria, and what specifically in these applications were the reasons and their views?
There isn't a set criteria that the Urban Design Panel consider applications. We, as officers and as managers, identify schemes that may raise issues of interest. So in this case, the issues of interest are the character of the site, the mix of uses, the listed, and specifically the listed building element, probably. In this case as well, the Urban Design Panel report should be available on the file to review, and it's taken at a snapshot in time. So we always say that it's a sort of a peer review and development of a scheme. So what they've considered isn't necessarily the scheme that's sitting before you today as well. I know that there's an annual review of the Urban Design Panel, and they will be starting to look at different issues and what their priorities might be going forward for the following year. So that will shift as policy shifts here as well. So that's hopefully provided some answer.
Yeah, thankfully.
Is that a follow-up, Councillor Cameron?
Just very, very quickly. So is there never an instance where anything that, because I understand it's a snapshot in time that they're giving their view on, so has there never been an instance where anything's been referred back to the Urban Design Panel if applications have changed quite significantly in the course of, discussions with officers, etc.? Thank you.
So the Urban Design Panel always takes part as part of pre-application discussions, so we never refer a formal application to them. That's not their role or a remit that they have, and I don't think there's been any example where we have gone back to them. The only time we may have gone back to them is where you've had a planning permission in principle and you've established the urban design principles, and when they come in following a permission being granted, that there's then detailed scheme comes forward, then a scheme might evolve and go back, but not a standalone scheme like this wouldn't go back.
Thank you very much, Convener. Thank you.
Just before, I apologise, Councillor Beale, just before you, if you don't mind, I just wanted to ask any other committee members who hadn't asked a question yet, whether anybody else wanted to ask something. Apologies. Carry on, Councillor Beale.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I just want to explore the economic viability a little bit. It's mentioned a few times in the report as a justification for the huge increase in density compared to the surrounding area. So I just wanted to, has that been checked by the relevant council department in terms of, because only 3 cowsheds are being retained, and so I find it hard to believe that's going to justify development for the whole of the site because of that. Thanks.
Just to say, they did actually look at the whole scheme in terms of the the volume of new build and the extent of demolition. And that was the conclusion, that it was still a low profit even with that level of retention.
Councillor Gunn, Councillor Booth.
Yeah, it's related, I think, to Councillor Beale's question. I'm just trying to understand this conservation deficit and the way it calculates. 'Cause it talks about the amount of money that needs to be put into existing structures to bring them up to a new value. And then there's a deficit if the new value is less than the amount of money you have to put in, I think, is my understanding of what you're saying. So that doesn't bode well, maybe, for a lot of structures across the city then. So I would like your comments on that, and more specifically also, what's the justification for this very small element? Is that a sweet point in the calculation then, that this amount of structure needs to be retained? To me, it seems a wee bit tokenist, because it's not even what it was originally intended for. It's just an element. So maybe you can go into a bit more detail about that, if you don't mind. Thank you, Claire.
What I would say is that the state of the buildings as they are becoming hazardous, so something would need to be done anyway. It's tricky, we did have long discussions with Historic Environment Scotland, who, I mean, obviously we were all trying to save as much of this structure as possible. So we did get some further retention from the original. The original proposal was for total demolition, so we kind of got it to a stage as far as we possibly could and kept pushing and pushing for further retention, including the roof structure, which originally was just supposed to be frames. It's extremely difficult, this, in terms of, how much you can retain to make a scheme viable. And I think it's at the cusp of how far we can go at this stage, and that's really all I can tell you. I mean, every structure, every building in Edinburgh is different. This is an unusual one in that it's an industrial structure. Most buildings are your typical kind of often stone buildings, which you can do a lot more with. They looked at things like putting housing under these structures, but nevertheless you would still have the issue of volume, and more to the point, the issue of repairing. You'd still have to do something with the repair of these structures. Even if you did nothing with it, the repair bill is gross. So that's kind of where we came to.
Is it a follow-up?
It is indeed a follow-up. So it's difficult as a committee member to evaluate that. I think it almost seems like we just have to accept that, and it's following, I think, Councillor Beale's comment of just, it doesn't seem it's not, I realise open book, we've looked at open book in terms of value for social housing in the past, but this seems more complex. And is there any way that you can give us some assurance other than your diligent work?
Can I just say yes? I was just going to mention that HAS has had sight of these the development appraisal documents as well, and came to ultimately a similar conclusion, although the only thing they said was that the marketing exercise that was done wasn't exactly in accordance with how they would normally specify it. However, I think they are realistic about the potential for use of these buildings, in that they're not a typical listed building. They're, a big industrial shed, basically, so it's limited in terms of its alternative uses. So that was in addition to Economic Development, who also had sites. So it was kind of put out there, and that was the conclusion. I mean, obviously, I'm no financial expert either, so I have to rely on the advice from the different bodies.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Convener. Just to come back on the affordable housing issue, so I see that, obviously we have the verbal assurance from the applicant that they want to try and provide 70% social rented, and they are talking to Link. Given their initial reticence, though, on that, what assurance can we have as a committee that if we grant this, we will get the 70% socially rented that is within our policy? Because I see that we have an informative, but I don't see a condition. And obviously an informative is very much, we would like you to do this, but we're not going to compel you.
Yes, I'll put it on.
We would never condition the type of affordable housing. So the type of affordable housing then comes through the legal agreement. So if committee were minded, we could put social rent within the informative for the legal agreement for the affordable housing. The way the legal agreements are structured is that it allows that range of affordable housing to be considered within it, and then it's a separate legal process that Alex then goes through with them in terms of agreeing that process. But we wouldn't ever condition that it's X percentage of social rented housing within a planning application.
Is it a follow-up?
So just to confirm, what you're proposing is a potential slight adjustment to the wording in the first informative to say, and can you just clarify what effect that would have? Would that have the effect that if they don't, if they get to the stage where they can't sign a legal agreement with 70% social rent, that it would then come back to committee for a decision, or what would the implications of that be?
It was just trying to explore what your preference was in terms of instruction for a legal agreement. We tend not to try and get into that level of detail to allow the negotiations within the legal agreement to take its normal course in action. I think Lottie might give comment on the terms of what is included for affordable housing in a legal agreement.
So the model provisions in the legal agreement are deliberately flexible, so that you sign the legal agreements, the requirement for affordable housing is in it, the proportion of affordable housing is in the agreement, and then it goes to Affordable Housing, Alex and colleagues, to negotiate what that ends up looking like, which gives you more scope down the line. You know, if there's a changing picture in the market or anything like that, you've got maximum option to pick something that suits the best scenario at the time. But we would go into that negotiation with instructions from Alex if something was to be done differently. If you wanted to use an informative to indicate what the committee's preference would be, then we can take that as a legal instruction into the negotiations with the applicants when the time comes. It wouldn't be something you would add as a condition, but we could use that as an instruction for going forward. Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll be revisiting that towards the latter end of discussion. Councillor Hislop.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Claire, as well. I just wanted to get further clarity on the concerns raised by environmental protection around sound, following on from Councillor Jones's question, particularly around something that I think I heard you say, which was that one of the aspects of their concern is that any future complaints from residents would have an impact on the operation, could potentially have an impact on the operation of an existing premises, the O2 Academy in this case. Can you give a bit more detail on that, please?
What we'd say just as background is there have been no complaints to date, despite the relative proximity of existing residences. The whole point of the noise impact assessment, looking at the worst case scenario, is to put conditions on this development that will not impose the O2 to have to put in additional mitigation measures. That's in line with the agent of change principle. So in our opinion, the range of conditions imposed and attached to the specific measures identified in the NIA are sufficient to mitigate, albeit, you know, we have slightly different standards to, you know, environmental protection have their own standards, so we have to assess this from a planning point of view in terms of what is reasonable and proportionate and enforceable in terms of conditions.
I was trying to work out who went up first. Councillor Jones, did you actually have a hand up? I saw you briefly, quickly. Then I saw Councillor Beale, then I saw Councillor Gardner. Oh, no, sorry, I apologise. No, it was Councillor O'Neill first, followed by Councillor Jones. Councillor O'Neill's going before you. Councillor Jones.
Oh, can I just check? I'm confused now, convener. Should we keep putting our hand up each time, or are you going to go in?
Oh, yes, we should.
Right. Yeah, cool. Just coming back to the question I asked. Sorry. Coming back to the question I asked earlier, I was wondering if I could get just something written down about the issue, like when is accessibility like overruled by listed building? Because sometimes I don't know where the line is and when to question it, and also some information about previous success about platform lifts, because it'll stop me asking these questions all the time. Thank you.
I think it's always legitimate to ask the question. It's always legitimate to raise these issues and prod and explore about it. You'll hear a lot in the answers is about that balance of judgment, and it's just. But please don't stop asking the questions. We will. Yeah, it's good to be examined and explore these matters.
I think also as each individual application is considered in isolation, it's really good to make sure that we deprobe all points because it will vary. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, convener. Ms McNeill, just at the end of the presentation, you referred to something that you just learnt. Can you just expand on that? I'm not clear about what the implications are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. The government, under their power, under Planning Act, have the ability at any point to identify if they think there is an application that may be of national significance that they wish to have a look at. Quite often, if you get a direction, it may be because there is a letter of objection from, say, Historic Environment Scotland or SEPA or something, then that can be a reason for calling. There is no objection letters from any statutory bodies, so therefore they're resting on that this proposal has implications potential national significance, and that is rooted in the agent of change principle in relation to noise and cultural venues. We received communication last week from them, some of the planning officers at the Scottish Government asking what stage we were at with the application, and we advised that it was going to committee this week. They have then issued a letter of direction, which means that we are unable to determine the application without reference to the ministers. So the procedure is that if committee are minded to grant today, then we will advise government that we are minded to grant, and a copy of the committee report will be sent to them. They then have 28 days in which the minister decides whether to call the application in. If the minister decides to call the planning application in, then it is likely it's referred to the Department of Appeals, and they would then appoint a reporter who would then examine the case and provide a written report. That may have further procedures of written procedures, a hearing, or they may just make a recommendation to ministers, and ultimately ministers become the planning authority and they decide the application. I hope that's not too long-winded. If they call it in, we don't know how long the time period would be.
Just to follow up to that, so national significance, the main area then is to do with the noise impact, is it, of the venue?
That is the indication in the direction. They have identified within the direction that they want to examine agent of change principles, so the noise principles in terms of cultural and noise venues.
Oh, I think, do you know what, I'm going to go slightly rogue. I'm going to go to Councillor McNeice because she was so patient.
Oh, that's very nice of you. I'm going back to materials again. Early on, you said that the render and finish was going to include things like a white material, buff material, and so on. And render, I'm just wondering, are these sort of new fireproof and mold-proof render materials, or are we going to end up seeing more of that kind of black and green streaking that we see all over the city and things that were put up in the 90s? where the mold is developed. So is there that kind of detail in terms of the kinds of render that are going to be put on these buildings?
A discussion is being had, Councillor Minnigan, and somebody will be with you very shortly.
Just to say, under planning legislation, we can't control the weathering of materials. Certainly, there are new materials coming on that are used in modern buildings, and that seem to wear okay. In terms of any fire considerations, that's out with planning. That would be a building standards issue. Yes, that I was going to add that, sorry. Yes, I have put a condition on that is going to ask for the exact specifications. It might also include samples, so we can only go as far as looking at the information on the materials, including their source, in terms of sustainability. We can't really predict how they're going to wear in specific environments.
Councillor Beale.
Thanks, Kavina. Changing what we're discussing a bit onto transport. I'm just a bit concerned about the overspill of cars onto neighbouring streets. So if I could ask what the expected level of car ownership would be, given there's 1,200 bed spaces, what would be, and there's only 2 car parking spaces, what would be the expected level of car ownership and certainly buy to rent parts of this? Thanks.
I should say, I don't know exactly. It's just going on other compatible BTR developments, especially this one where you've got your near active travel and public transport. I believe it's also controlled by the provider, but obviously that's not enforceable from a planning point of view. So it's just based on experience, the kind of demographic of people that occupy these units. So I don't have an exact percentage or figure.
Follow up.
Yeah, so obviously it's 0.5% at the moment. You haven't got any idea what's 10, 5, 2%? No idea. Okay, thanks.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Gardner, Councillor Booth.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions, so if you can come back to me after I've asked the first one. So can you please show the site plan on the screen so the committee can see it? I'm looking at it on the system, and it looks like the lift is between the PBSA block 3 and the affordable block. So it's not between it's the stairs which are between Michael Malone's and the existing building, whereas the lift, if I'm understanding the plan correctly, is in a larger area where
apologies, Councillor Gardner, I've just missed the fact that Matthew Simpson wanted to come in, I think, on the previous question. So if you don't mind, I'll just allow him to come in. Apologies.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, convener. It was just a comment on the parking. The concerns I have with it is that the level of parking is essentially determined by the fact that the developer and the operator are going to prohibit parking, prohibit car ownership. Therefore, their assumption is that car ownership is going to be extremely low. My concern is that that is both unenforceable and impractical. There is parking available, considerable parking available in surrounding streets as they're uncontrolled. And my view, and I hasten to add that this is not, I'm not a lawyer or solicitor in any form, but my view is that that would fall flat in terms of potentially the Equality Act and also the Human Rights Act, in that it's restricting a legally ownable piece of equipment, i.e. a car. So that's my fundamental concern with this.
Stunned everybody. Okay, sorry, Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, so is that the plan? Thank you. So my understanding, please correct me if it's incorrect, is the lift is between the PBSA block 3 and the affordable housing block. So it's not adjacent to listed buildings. There is some degree of space there. So I appreciate ramps do take a lot of space, but it's not quite as we heard.
No, I'll respond since it was me that pointed it out. I think what I tried to say was that there's one set of stairs that sits between two listed buildings, which is in this section here. So there's limited option to put the ramp in there. Yes, within this section here is the set of stairs. So there's limited ramp options there because of the listed buildings. In this location here where the lift is going, there's not the historic buildings, but there is still that shift in level. And it's the shift in level in that location that then restricts the ability to put the ramp in, because by the time you start putting a ramp in, I think it's something like where's the section, Claire?
Sorry.
We'll just get the section up to show you the
section.
You've got the section. Just bear with us a second. We've got it drawn with a section on it. We had it a second ago. There. So you actually see the shift in level on this drawing here. So the ramping to get from this section here down to ground level would be fairly significant in the length that you would need to get to be able to maintain the gradients. And that's the restriction that we've then had to put the lift in rather than the ramping in that location. And it's purely down to land levels in that location.
Yeah, but it would still be physically possible with a different design to have the ramp. It would take some space, but there's no sort of physical. There is a change in level. That's why you have ramps. So it's not. It is possible to design a ramp into it. Had they decided to do that, it might have made the footprint. Just a second, please. Sorry, it might have made the footprint of the building smaller, perhaps, but it would have been possible.
Oh yeah, 100% agree. The footprint of the buildings would be smaller. You would reduce your development type. You would reduce your space. There's then also the discussion and consideration about length of a ramp and how long a ramp then is for accessibility for a walking point that then zigzags back and down across the hill, and then having rest points within there if your ramp is too long and whatever else. So there's a huge number of design issues in and around a ramp, and it is technically possible. It's always technically possible. I think we've had those discussions before on other schemes as well, where we've looked at the length and size of ramps and resting points and things as well. So it would be possible. You would then be reducing the level of development that's on the site that then pushes the margins of the development site again, and goes back to that, what you raised about the conservation deficit and the level of development on the site as well. So it's one of these imbalanced discussions. It's one of these things in the round.
Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Camilla. My question was going back to the noise issue, and I think you said there have been no existing complaints about noise from the O2. Can you just clarify what timetable that covers? Because presumably it wasn't in use a great deal during the pandemic. And can you also clarify on the site plan where the existing housing is? Because obviously my understanding is that it's sort of behind the commercial units on. So obviously if there's a building between the O2 and the existing commercial, then the fact that there are no existing complaints about noise wouldn't necessarily have an implication on this, which is right next to it.
No, that's a totally fair point. The timescale is of whole time since it's been operating. So no, absolutely fair enough. You're right. That's why, if that were the case, then we wouldn't put any conditions in the current scheme. So the whole point of putting conditions in this current scheme is indeed to recognise that closer proximity, which, as you said, it's just a kind of incidental comment, but doesn't necessarily have any bearing on the current situation.
I would just to clarify, you know, that all point in time, I think what's important here is that the O2 have come in recently as operator, and there has been a shift in the operation of that business. It's a far more commercial music group that's come in, and I think there has been an increase in events and concerts, etc., that are taking place now at the Corn Exchange. It was, even pre-pandemic days, it was a quieter venue, whereas there has been a shift.
Follow up.
Thanks, that's helpful. Can you just point out on the slide where the existing housing is that is closest to the O2, please?
sorry, cursor's not working. Can you see those kind of whitish blocks right behind the, that's John Swan and Sons on Newmark Road? Yeah. Sorry, the top of the slide, there's kind of two almost like C-shaped blocks with kind of whitish looking roofs. And also if you look to the left of those, that's another block, that's more residential behind the new build offices.
Councillor Meakin?
Thank you. I had a question, and it was touched on before, but it's really about the loss of sporting and leisure provision that currently exists on that. And we were kind of pointed on the map to other sites where there are other sporting opportunities, but obviously we know that somebody that likes bowling might not go and take up rugby or what have you. So you said that the developers were in discussion about having, for example, the indoor five-a-side, which would have been really popular. They're in discussion about looking at that in the surrounding area. If we could get a bit more detail on that, are we talking about a 5-minute cycle away? Or are we talking about, a 25-minute bus ride away, or what's the general area, or do we know?
No, I mean, that's over and above this application, and all that we have information on that at the moment is a statement from Watkins Jones, so that's not really, a matter for this planning application at the moment. We can't give that detail of information.
Convener, if I can I ask one more that we probably can't answer?
If you don't think they can answer it, is it worth asking?
They might. In terms of the percentage that's student housing, has anybody in planning or had conversations with the 4 universities as to the level of new build student housing that they actually require?
I don't have specifics in front of me today, but I know that the head of planning has regular meetings and contact with the universities, and there are regular discussions about how the universities develop and their development programmes, including student housing.
Okay.
Right. Do we have any? Councillor Booth, Councillor Beale.
Sorry, Convener. I'm going to ask
Councillor Gardner.
I'm going to ask my usual question about the cycle parking. I think you said that although it complies with guidance in terms of the numbers, it doesn't comply with guidance in terms of the percentage of accessible or non-standard cycle racks. Can you just clarify what is the proportion of non-standard, and did we enter into any discussion with the developer about how they might be able to comply more closely with the policy in terms of the accessibility of the cycle parking, but perhaps some compromise on numbers, or is that not the approach that we're taking?
We have the store in the former auction ring building, which is designed for non-standard bikes. Now, obviously, details of that have to be provided, so that's why there's a condition in that. So, there will be a bit of toing and froing potentially, but yes, there is space there. But we need the details and, to make sure things like, these lifts are accessible. So this is all stuff that's been conditioned.
I think that'll be something we'll be revisiting towards the end as well, if we can make a note of that one as well. Councillor Beale, followed by, I think, was it Councillor Gardner?
Okay, thanks, Convener. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up the noise issue as well. Another application that we have looked at considered a different kind of solution to noise outside using mechanical ventilation. Is that something that could be put into a condition with this application? Thanks.
I do have a condition on that's one of the conditions. I think it's 7 till 9 or 6 to 8, the conditions, the 3 of them. So there is something in there. I need to look at it. I don't have it right in front of me. But yes, we're just looking at that right now.
Any noise mitigation and conditions that come out of that are developed by noise consultants and acousticians, I think is the right term for them, who will then develop the conditions and the requirements. So if you look at condition 7 and 8 and 9 and part 10 as well, all deal with noise proposals as part of that, and including reference back to the noise impact assessment, and that's the appropriate means we would be guided by the technical aspects of that.
Is it a follow-up?
It is, but it does seem to be sticking around the windows for abatement of noise, but obviously mechanical ventilation is a different solution to abate noise. And that's, if that could be conditioned as a possible solution to limit noise rather than having...
within condition 8, Councillor Beale, and it refers back to paragraphs 4.73 and 4.74 on page 18 of the noise impact assessment, and it says approved construction and mechanical ventilation details will be incorporated in the respective areas of the building before any of the residences within these areas are occupied. So it's covered.
But that's not referencing noise there, as far as I can see. Anyway, if it's in there,
but it's the noise impact assessment, and it's the details within those specific paragraphs of the noise impact assessment that's then referencing back to the requirements set out in the noise impact assessment submitted in support of the application.
Okay.
After Councillor Gallagher, Councillor Booth, I would ask committee, because this has now been going on for questioning for about an hour. If questions have already been asked, can we try to be quite succinct about what follow-ups we're asking on them? Because there's quite a lot of additional sort of talking. So please, can we try to keep them a little bit more tight? Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Gardner.
Yes, it was a follow-up actually to Councillor O'Neill's question, and you were going to come back to it, and I think the convener spoke over you. It was to do with protecting the lift. Is that a possibility with a cover or something like that?
We wondered whether we might require a condition requiring the full design of the lift to come in and be submitted for agreement, and it could then look at the design as to whether it's an actual structure, a bit like some of the Waverley Station lift that links down rather than an open platform lift or something like that. So we've started to draft a potential condition.
Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Convener. And now for something completely different. Can you just clarify, in terms of policy retail 5, obviously some of the objectors have pointed out that this could potentially have a significant negative impact on this local centre. I think the argument is that it will lose, if we lose the home of football, we lose the bowling, then we lose a potential very significant amount of draw to this local centre. I think the argument put forward in the report is that that will be compensated by the additional footfall provided by the housing. What analysis has been done in that assessment?
It hasn't as such. It's just a calculation in terms of the amount of people that are coming into the area, as opposed to just a commercial use. So that's what it's based on, is just pure numbers of people in the area and potential visitors for people actually looking in the site itself. So you lose one draw. This might actually pull people into the site because you're kind of focusing on the heritage issues.
Okay, are we now finished with questions? We will now move on to discussion. What would people like to discuss? Anybody like to kick us off? If not, I'll do it. I don't know how many of us, because I can't actually remember how many of us actually went to go and visit the site. It is incredibly complicated, and there's an awful lot that's gone on sort of with this. And I know there's an awful lot of hesitation about what we're actually losing. I think, though, we need to have a look at the positives of what we're actually going to gain from this site. And I'm delighted that there's going to be much more accessibility in terms of a flow through towards the Water of Leith, a reduction within cars, a better look at flooding, an actual sort of a way of bringing in a site that is literally falling apart and possibly giving it a future. Because there's a massive concern that if something isn't done, this site is not fit for purpose as it is. And if you went to go visit it, you'll see exactly, you know, what it looks like at the moment. It is disappointing that we're going to lose large chunks of it, and it is a concern that there is an issue with the noise mitigation, obviously, with the O2. We do have the agent of change principle, so hopefully that will protect the O2, which has an existing function there. And obviously, as we've been told earlier, this can be called in by ministers to discuss this further if they have a concern over it. So there is an additional point to that. There are problems, obviously, with accessibility. It is disappointing there isn't a ramp. I don't feel that, you know, having a lift is not ideal in any circumstance. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. It's whether there are small elements within this site that are complicated, but I think that shows the fact there are problems about developing a site like this. And the thing that I am pleased about is, as we are submitting city plan, this is an example of where we've actually got student accommodation and we've got residential use and we've got a small element of commercial use in an urban-led area. So I would like to believe that this is something that as a committee we could support. There are a couple of issues that I think we're going to be discussing in terms of conditions and informatives, but I am minded to grant this application once we've discussed, obviously, some additional possible conditions. So with that, I will hand over to committee. Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Convener. I would agree with you that this development has a lot to offer. In particular, if we can find a way of gaining some assurance in terms of the affordable housing, if it will actually deliver, 70% social rent, that is significant, and I would encourage planners to suggest what they're suggesting in terms of an adjustment to the informative in that respect. I think in terms of the accessibility, we've heard real concerns about the lift and whether that can be delivered in perpetuity. I think my preference would be that we look again at whether or not we can add a condition or an informative, asking them, notwithstanding the development in front of us, that the proposals for landscaping and in particular that particular aspect, they look again at whether a ramp can be delivered. I still come down to the issue of the noise. When, in the previous session, I was on the Music is Audible working group, and I am acutely aware that we have a massive shortage of live music venues in Edinburgh, and the cultural life of the city means that we need to protect those. And I'm not convinced that the condition that's in front of us addresses the noise concerns. We have an objection from environmental protection, and in my view, we should consider very, very carefully whether we overrule that objection. I also have concerns that we're losing a sports facility here. If this was an outdoor sports facility, then there would be an additional condition, there would be an additional section of our LDP that they would have to satisfy. And because it's indoor, that element of our LDP doesn't apply. And I have real concerns that we are losing very big chunks of the listed building, and are we actually retaining enough of that built heritage? So I'm currently leaning towards moving rejection of the application, primarily on the grounds of DES 5A amenity. I just think that the potential impact on the amenity of future occupiers is going to be so significant that I would prefer that we don't. I can't see that the current condition addresses that, and I would prefer that we don't approve this application today, but I'm obviously in the hands of committee.
Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Convener. I share much of what Councillor Booth has just made reference to around the loss of sports facilities and the whole issue around accessibility. I do, but like yourself, I think there's much to commend in this application. It is a very complex site, but as you say, it provides social housing, and I hope that we can increase the element of social housing within this. as I said in last week's planning committee when we were talking about our Schedule 4s for the city plan, I think committee has done a really important job today. There's been lots and lots of important questions around what is a very, very complex site. And my view is that this should be supportive, and we would await the outcome of what we've been informed by officers today in terms of what ministers will decide to do on the whole agent of change principle. But on balance, having considered carefully and listened to colleagues' questions and responses, I'm supportive of the application. Thank you, Convener.
Councillor Beale, followed by Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, I mean, I have, it's good to see a brownfield site being developed, but I do have concerns about this, particularly in terms of the overspill into the surrounding area. But again, based on the information we've got, I can't justify that particular point. Also, the height and scale seems to be, and density seems to be highly in excess of the surrounding areas. It's where the surrounding areas is two-storey. So I have concerns about that. Too many properties, too many dwellings on one site. And failing dual views, there's quite a few sort of smaller issues that it fails on. So I do have concerns. I'm so kind of minded to fail it on these, so it can be a smaller site. But I do bear in mind what we said about the economic viability. But a lot is being based, in my opinion, being based on that. If that saying it's a tight site, then I'm kind of minded to prove it on that basis. But I do have concerns about some of these other issues as well. Thanks.
Councillor Gardner.
Thanks, Convener. So I share a number of Councillor Booth's concerns. I'll start with the loss of fabric. And I don't think that it's the space, if you've ever, we've all, as a committee, visited the site, and some of us have been there previously for kids' football or adult football, etc. And the spaces within are really interesting spaces. They're almost akin to a smaller scale, like railway stations. So they're utilitarian structures. And I don't consider just using a few of the columns at the front is sufficient to replicate the loss of these spaces. And I don't know that the Historic Environment Scotland have really taken that part of it fully into consideration. We're kind of a wee bit at the hands of the economic viability report, and I appreciate Claire's comments and helping us with that. But nonetheless, I am really concerned about the loss of the fabric, and particularly the loss of these large voluminous spaces. So I'm a bit of a loss where I'm going on this one, but I do feel also, and also that unfortunately the indoor football thing isn't protected under planning. I understand that. It will be a loss to the area. The music thing, I think it does need to be, we do need to be strong on that one, because we may lose the football venues, but I don't think we can afford to risk losing a major music venue like the O2 has become and can grow. The Playhouse caters for a different kind of music now, and I'm going to go there on Saturday with my daughter to see the Proclaimers, but it's frequently not for musical concerts that will be at the O2. So I think we need to be tight on this one. And I draw the committee's attention, and maybe planners can consider this, although there isn't precedent in planning, but at the end of Commercial Street, there was a development which was next to the docks, and there was concern about, in order to mitigate against that, it went to a passive house form of development. So I don't know if there's some sort of tighter condition if this is going to go through. And I'd be interested to hear Councillor Booth's final verdict on it, because I am concerned about the loss of fabric. But if it is going to go through, I would hope that we could be very tight on the musical venue side of it, so that we don't lose the O2 venue. So thank you, Convener.
I'm just going to go back to planners for a second, because I think we're going down a particular line here, and I just want to double check in terms of the agent change principle, so there's a clear understanding in terms of where the risk lies. I think it's really, really important we clear this issue up, as it is coming up as a reason for refusal, which is the fact, the risk to the O2. So I want to give the planners a chance to come back on that, to explain where this actually sits in terms of an explanation, to be clear, so that committee is fully understanding of the agent of change principle and how this applies in this case.
Yeah, the agent of change principle has evolved out of your Planning Advice Note Noise, PAN 1 2011, which advocates, in the report on page 27, we cover it, it says, advocates a pragmatic approach to the location of new development within the vicinity of existing noise generating uses. So what the agent of change principles then enshrined into section 41A of the 97 Act, and that is where we have an existing noise generating uses, and it specifically mentions existing cultural venues or facilities, but not limited to live music. It's that relationship between your live music venue, your cultural venue, and you're bringing in a sensitive receptor adjacent to that. So are you comfortable that the housing there wouldn't then generate additional noise complaints, which would mean that there would be additional restrictions placed on the O2? Now, as part of our assessment, when we have considered that, what is a consideration is the original planning permission for the O2 venue, which is detailed on page 27 as well. So we're back to a 1998 planning permission, which had conditions attached to the O2 venue. And whilst it is a B-listed building, it's got an acoustic box within it. So they already have conditions that the O2 have to operate under for it. And I don't know if I've got the exact wording of the condition there, but it relates to inaudibility within neighbouring apartments. We are introducing apartments closer to it, but there's still that remaining condition about inaudibility remains on that original 1998 planning permission. So we're not introducing any additional conditions or burdens as part of this planning permission. The condition from 1998 states that the soundproofing of the premises, so this is the O2 venue, and the control of all amplified sound, including music, speech, electronic video games or other amusement machines, being such that no amplified sound is audible in nearby residential or commercial properties. So there's already that condition on your O2 venue. Is whether you feel that there's a greater risk then to them of generating noise complaints and being in breach of that condition by introducing residential in a closer proximity. And that's the decision that you have to come to. So the conditions that are on the permission that we have added, conditions 6, 7 and 8, I think. Nope. 7, 8 and 9 come out of the noise impact assessment, and these are acoustic attenuation measures to the properties, so the new residential properties, and that includes double glazing, trickle vents, there is mechanical specifications and roof construction specifications, and they're to be incorporated into the buildings that are identified within the noise impact assessment as well. So there are additional acoustic measures identified onto those properties. And then condition 9 also has a barrier to be erected in a specific location in relation to the build to rent properties as well. And that's a lot to do with the deliveries and the vehicle movements into the O2 as well. So there's a range of different things happening. It's not an easy decision. It's quite a complex, very, very subtle decision, this one.
I will allow, I saw Councillor Gardner had a hand up. I will allow a question to officers if it is specific about the agent of change. If it's not about that, then we're moving on. Did anyone have any specific questions about what has just been said? Okay.
Well, it was to do with the 1998 consent, because you might have another venue, like say the Playhouse, just for example, a similar sort of venue which didn't have it was built before planning consents were. So do we need to, is the 1998 consent really that relevant? Because it could be another venue which has music which exists under the Agent of Change Act, not subject to planning consents and so on. So I'm just questioning, is it that, do we have to hang on that thing so much?
It's relevant in this case, and that it's this specific application, and that is a condition that they currently operate under. So if some of those existing residential premises tomorrow turned around and said there was a noise issue, there is the power to enforce under that 1998 permission. And that's, we just identifying it as it's there, and there's already a restriction. We're not adding any restrictions, and I think that's what the agent of change principle is, that you shouldn't be adding restrictions or conditions onto a venue. So you shouldn't turn around and say to the O2, if they hadn't had that acoustic box, say you need to add an acoustic box into your premises. So you're adding a burden to them. You should never be doing that. But in this case, they already have a condition. So the playhouse, if you were to take that example, if you're putting new housing next to the playhouse, you couldn't turn around and say to the playhouse, you have to stop at a certain hour and you must acoustically glaze all your property or put a sound box in. That's the subtlety, and that's why it's been highlighted.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so we've had contributions from Councillor Jones.
I just want to say, I think for me, the sticking point was about the noise, but I really thank Ms Campbell for the explanation of the agent of change and the principles behind it. And I am now satisfied that this has actually been thought through very carefully and actually very well, in my opinion. So I am very happy to support this application.
Councillor Hislop.
Thanks, convener. Like a lot of my colleagues, I'm a little bit split on this. I think there's a lot of good elements in this application. Unlike Councillor Beale, really welcome the high density. And I think that's a direction that we will be moving in as a city, particularly on brownfield sites. And so I welcome that. I welcome the fact that there's no, there's no two accessible car spaces, and so it's going to be a low traffic impact, hopefully, on the community. My concern, evidenced by the fact that I asked the question about the sound, is on the impact on the cultural venues. And I think, evidently, from the communication that the departments had from the Scottish Government, that's obviously the reason why they've called it in as well. I may be making an assumption there, but that seems to be what's been said. Like colleagues, I've been to I play fives at World of Football numerous times, and it is a shame that that's not protected within planning policy. So yeah, I'm very split on this, because there's a balance between pros and cons, but I feel like the risk, from what we've heard, to the potential impact that it'll have on the O2 Academy, which is a really valuable cultural space for the city, is swaying me towards leaning with Councillor Booth.
I just want to be clear, though, it hasn't actually been called in. There might be a potential. They put a marker down that possible, but it hasn't actually been called in yet. Anybody else wish to comment before we move forward to vote? Right. I will be proposing. Oh no, do we want to discuss conditions, or do? Yeah, we need to. Before we do that, we'll need to have a conversation about conditions. The conditions that have been considered, we needed to have a bit of a better understanding about the lift and the actual how the functioning, the maintenance of it, and whether it can be reviewed, of whether that. As there's an existing condition on it, is there a possibility that can be looked at to see whether a ramp would be possible to be put in instead?
Just to say, we can condition the design of the lift and this exact specification. We can't condition the maintenance, but we can put an informative on about the maintenance. That's the kind of scope with the lift. It's just a case of getting the wording correct.
Do you want to explain about the ramp?
Yeah, the problem with the ramp is it would make a fundamental redesign of the scheme.
Yes, you can, Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, I appreciate that there was an opportunity for the ramp, but that would be not something you could condition because it would change the scheme. In terms of the lift, can we condition that it's an enclosed lift? You have talked about that, and I think that would improve the maintenance of it. So is that something we can condition? It seems a more reasonable thing to do than...
As far as I know from the drawings, it's and the examples that have been provided, it would be an enclosed lift. So again, we could control that within. If we put a condition on be satisfied with the design and it's got to be approved in writing, then we can indeed approve or not approve the design that's put forward. So that would provide control.
So on that basis, can we mention that it should be an enclosed lift? I think that satisfied Councillor or helped satisfy Councillor O'Neill, and I'd be supportive of that.
Yeah, I think we can.
Councillor O'Neill, would you like to speak for yourself?
I think the men are doing a fine job, not that they should. No, I'm very happy with what you've worded there. I think it's a very specific thing. I know lifts, I know ramps, and I know it's very difficult. What I would love is if the next time we go on a planning visit, everyone goes in a wheelchair as well, and you have a shot of finding if you would like suit a ramp or not. But yeah, it's going to be an enclosed lift. Lifts break down all the time, as we know. That's another issue that we can come to. And I welcome the crossing, and now that I've looked at it, I'm a lot more confident that I'll now be able to go get my shopping, so that's nice. So I have no further comments, unless Councillor Booth wants to say something on that. No, you're good, okay.
I'm positive Councillor Booth will talk a bit later on. So we also had a further condition, or possibly, well, either a further condition or possibly an additional informative regarding the cycle parking and looking at adaptable cycle parking as well, to get a bit better information about what was available.
Yeah, we've got an existing condition on details of the cycle parking, but we can certainly beef that up accordingly if you want to add some stronger wording.
I'll just cover the condition. So the condition says the detailed specifications for the secure cycle parking hereby proposed shall be designed in accordance with the standards set out in the Edinburgh design guidance and the council cycles fact sheet. And the platform lift into the site shall be specified to allow for cargo bikes, adapted cycles, and all new steps shall include gutter to improve access for cycles. So we will add the additional condition in and around the lift, but we do have that all cycle spaces need to be designed in accordance with that. That's already on there.
Was there any other condition or informative that affordable housing?
I might just bring Alex in a second if he's got a comment on it, but informative, I spoke without double checking the details. So 25% of the residential units to be of an agreed affordable tenure, delivered in accordance with the Council's affording housing policy and guidance, including a social rent element of at least 70% is already on there. We still like to try and give flexibility to affordable housing depending on market, whatever, so it wouldn't necessarily be fixed, you know, if it dropped to 60% or 65%, we would still appreciate the flexibility within the drawing up of the legal agreement depending on what affordable housing came to, so it would be within our normal tenures and acceptable process.
Alex, is there anything you wish to add? Are you content with that?
Yeah, I think it probably is just helpful, committed to just draw out that it is a really difficult balance, delivering the affordable housing on site and balancing that with maximising social rent, but being careful not to render the affordable housing unviable or impractical for an RSL. I mean, there is currently market and economic volatility, and RSLs may need the flexibility to vary tenure to deliver on-site affordable housing. To give a kind of example of that, we've seen increase in construction costs in the last year, which probably no one would have imagined. And so that the risk is that there could conceivably be a shortfall in funding for affordable housing, and that would be more of a risk if we were overly prescriptive in terms of the affordable housing mix. However, as Elaine had set out, that informative does basically mean that if the applicant doesn't agree to the 70% social rent, then the Section 75 would ultimately not be agreed, and then we'd need to return to committee. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, I think I'm now going to move on formally because I don't know about anybody else. My eyes are beginning to go a bit funny. Okay, I will be moving with the additions of what we just discussed in terms of the conditions and informatives. I will be moving approval of this application. We've done an awful lot of work on the new city plan, and a lot of what about the new city plan was talking about, you know, development of our brownfield sites. I know there's been mention, obviously, of a loss of a leisure facility, which is always unfortunate. I have a strong suspicion we'd be losing the leisure facility anyway, due to the fact of the state of the actual building itself. We're now into a position where we are desperately needing to balance things within our city. We are desperately needing housing. We are desperately needing all sorts of facilities. We have a good example of something coming forward that under our new plan is would be much more supportive of an idea like this. And I think we have to be extremely careful about almost nitpicking small items. There's always going to be a degree of balance in anything that's urban-led, because we're never going to get 100% of an absolutely perfect situation. So we have to understand there will be a degree of flexibility, and you know, this has been incredibly complicated, and based on the fact that this was an hour presentation, it shows how much work has actually gone into this site. I am extremely mindful and extremely cautious of the idea that if we turn down this application due to infringements and things like that, what that actually means for this site going forward, and also the message that will send to developers who've worked extremely hard to bring something forward. I am very mindful of the fact that it is incredibly important that we keep a cultural venue going, and I think that is absolutely really important with the agent of change principle and with very, very, very strong noise mitigation and conditions being put onto this. I am hopeful the fact that that will actually go a long way. There's also the additional position of it could be called in by the Scottish Government to be looked at. I feel that in terms of our position, this is something that as a committee we should be supporting, because this is something that in our new plan will be something we'll be seeing an awful lot more of coming forward to the future. And we have talked quite a lot about having mixed tenure in terms of our applications, so that students would live amongst residential and we could actually get some decent affordable housing that's near to some decent facilities and is near to some pretty decent bus routes. So if I sound slightly passionate about this, I am, because I feel that this is something where, when I viewed the site myself, it is in a terrible state. It is absolutely dire. And I would be really, really concerned that if we turned this down, that site would fall apart, and what would come forward would be extremely complicated, if anything. So with that, I will be moving approval of this this application. I just want to check, Councillor Cameron, if there's any alternative. Councillor Booth. Oh, sorry, seconder.
Yeah, sorry, I'm very happy to. I can concur with everything you've said, and all the, what you've set out in your remarks there. So I'm happy to second you in approving the application. Thank you.
Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Camilla. I will move rejection of the application on the grounds that it is contrary to policy DES 5A of the LDP, and also contrary to section 59 of the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Area Scotland Act 1997. Some of my concerns have been addressed. I think that the concern I had about affordable housing, I think that has been addressed in terms of the informative. The concerns about accessibility, I think, have broadly been addressed through the adjustment to the condition on the lift, although I do wonder whether we need to, as Planning Committee, look again at the guidance, especially if, as Councillor O'Neill said, we frequently have outside lifts breaking down and effectively having no access there for disabled people. I wonder whether we need to look again at our guidance in that respect. But I suppose the fundamental issue for me is, and as I said previously, this has a lot to to benefit in terms of the brownfield site and the affordable housing and so on. But the fundamental question for me is what is the potential impact of the noise from the O2 going to be on the amenity for future residents? And I think planners said it's a finely balanced judgment, but the question for me, is there a greater risk of noise complaints if we grant this application? And as somebody who has sat on licensing board for 5 years, who knows that we do get complaints from residents about noise from licensed venues, that I can pretty much guarantee that if we grant this application, we will get more noise complaints. And I don't want to see this venue at risk of being closed down because we have approved this planning application today. And I also think that you know, the proportion of the listed structures which are remaining in this application is not, for me, compliant with that section of the listed Buildings and Conservation Area Act. So I would move rejection on those two grounds. I note that Councillor Beale also raised a couple of other concerns that I haven't covered. So if he wants to suggest additional reasons for refusal, I'm happy to consider those as part of my motion, but I would move rejection on those grounds, Convener.
The planners have asked if they could come in to clarify.
Councillor Booth, I wondered, we've obviously got two applications. We've got a listed building application, which you've highlighted section 59 of the Act. In terms of the full application, in addition to the Act, I wonder if you would be considering policies EMV3 and EMV4 in terms of listed buildings setting and listed buildings alterations and extensions, and EMV2 listed buildings demolition.
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
So, Councillor Booth, you're looking for a seconder.
I'm just wondering if Councillor Beale wants to second. And
if I can come in there, I mean, like I said, looking at all the arguments, I'm kind of this sort of the infringements are fairly minor at the end of the day. I can see it's failing on the dual aspects and failing on the sunlight, but I don't think they are going to be strong enough to.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Councillor Beale, but this is purely about whether you're going to be seconding refusal or not. It's not contribution, so it's just a quick question. Did you want to second the refusal?
No.
Right.
Okay.
So Councillor Gardner, you'll be seconding.
I'm happy to second. I just wanted, given Councillor Booth's comment, I wasn't sure where that was going. Thank you, Convener. So I think Councillor Booth has covered much of what I'd like to say. It will be a difficult site to develop, but I just feel there's not enough recognition of this unique for Edinburgh structure. So I'd be happy to, if Councillor Booth is so minded, to take on the ENV 2, 3 and 4 that Elaine and Claire have mentioned. And I think if there is to be if this is moved and there's to be a redesign, I think there's an opportunity to look perhaps at the ramp, but I do appreciate that it's 2 levels, so it would be quite a long ramp. But we have heard lived experience from Councillor O'Neill about lifts breaking down. So given the volume of housing and student housing on this site, I think it is important to have a secondary measure where that is possible to incorporate in the design, and I think it would have been possible to incorporate. So it's important to protect existing venues like the music venue, and I think also these sheds are spatially quite interesting, and that hasn't really been recognised in the report as much as I'd have thought would be appropriate. So therefore, I'm happy to second Councillor Booth on this one. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, so with that, committee, shall we go to the vote?
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, so with that, we'll just move to the vote. So obviously, we're dealing with item 7.1. We'll just clarify the position. So, excuse me, we have the motion moved by Councillor Osler, seconded by Councillor Cameron to approve the application as per the conditions, reasons and formatives in the report, with an additional formative regarding the maintenance of the lift and an additional condition that the lift needs to be enclosed and the planning authority need to be satisfied with the design of the lift. We have an amendment moved by Councillor Booth, seconded by Councillor Gardner, as to refuse the application as it is contrary to LDB policy DES 5A, ENV2, ENV3, ENV4 and section 59 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Scotland Act 1997. So we'll just do the vote by roll call. Councillor Osler for the motion or amendment.
Motion, please.
Councillor Beale.
Motion.
Councillor Booth.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Cameron.
Motion, please.
Councillor Dalgleish.
Motion, please.
Councillor Gardner.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Hislop.
Amendment.
Councillor Jones.
Motion, please.
Councillor McNeice-Meakin.
I think I'm going for the motion.
And Councillor O'Neill.
Amendment, please.
So that's 6 votes for the motion and 4 votes for the amendment. So the motion is passed and planning permission is granted.
Committee has now been sitting for a fairly long period of time, so I think...
So can we just, sorry, 7.2 as well, the listed building application.
Apologies, committee. We now need to look at the listing building consent for this application. I've just got to go back to my recommendations. So we need to obviously consider 7.2 of this, the Act. I agree the fact that it should be granted, so I'm moving granting of it.
Yeah,
Councillor Cameron, seconding.
Yes, happy to second you formally, convener.
Councillor Booth.
Move rejection on the previous grounds.
Councillor Gardner.
Move rejection. I think this is stronger, the historic aspects, but on the previous grounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner.
Sorry,
Yes.
just to advise that it should be section 14 for the listed building application rather than the previously quoted section of the Act, just for Martin in his minute. Thank you.
Yeah, so we can just go to the vote for this one then. So we have the motion moved by Councillor Osler, seconded by Councillor Cameron, is to approve listed building consent as per the report. We have an amendment moved by Councillor Booth, seconded by Councillor Gardner, is to refuse listed building consent as contrary to section 14 of the Act. So we'll just do the vote by roll call as advised. So Councillor Osler for the motion or amendment.
Motion, please.
Councillor Beale.
Motion, please.
Councillor Booth.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Cameron.
Motion.
Councillor Dalgleish.
Motion, please.
Councillor Gardner.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Hislop.
Amendment.
Councillor Jones.
Motion, please.
Councillor McNeice-Meakin.
I'm running on low battery here, myself and the device I'm on. Am I able to abstain on this? Because this part I feel less clear on.
Okay, we'll just have abstention. And Councillor O'Neill.
Amendment, please.
So that's 5 votes for the motion and 4 votes for the amendment. So listed building consent is granted.
Okay, committee, we've got quite a full agenda. It is now 32 minutes past. We will come back at 22. Please can we be prompt because we've got 2 other full applications. We will then break for lunch and then we'll do the section 4s.